Oh, I liked it all right, but I had to get out and earn a little bread. I had to get out and earn a living. Oh, what do I remember most about my childhood? Peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, if you want to know.
That's great.
There are actors who play tough guys, and then there are legends who lived the part. These 10 men were not just pretending for the camera. They survived real battles, street fights, and hard labor before bringing raw grit to the silver screen. Today, we're revealing the untold truth about the 10 toughest actors in Hollywood history. The ones whose real-life scars made their on-screen brawls look almost tame. 1. Audie Murphy. If you saw Audie Murphy walk into a studio in the late 1940s, you might not look twice. He stood 5'5", thin and soft-spoken, looking more like a choir boy than a fighter. Casting agents routinely ignored him. Directors thought he was too gentle for the kind of roles he wanted. Yet, Audie Murphy was the most decorated American soldier of World War II. The legend is not just Hollywood hype. He earned 33 medals for bravery, including the Medal of Honor, all before he turned 21. Murphy's story reads like pure fiction. He grew up poor in rural Texas, picking cotton and hunting for food to help his family survive the Great Depression. At just 16, he lied about his age to join the army after Pearl Harbor. It wasn't long before he found himself in Italy, North Africa, and France, fighting battles where the only rule was survival. He was wounded 3 times, saw his friends killed in front of him, and lost his own brother to the war. Still, he kept going. The most famous moment of his military career happened near Holtzwihr, France. Surrounded by Germans, his unit was running low on men and ammunition. Instead of retreating, Murphy ordered his men to fall back while he climbed onto a burning tank destroyer. Alone, exposed, and already wounded, he grabbed the machine gun and fired at waves of enemy soldiers for over an hour. Somehow, he survived. His actions saved countless lives and turned the tide of that battle. After the war, Murphy's story landed on the cover of Life magazine. Hollywood came calling, hoping to cash in on his fame. They didn't expect him to succeed. He was too small, too quiet, and too haunted. But Murphy had a presence on camera that no acting coach could teach. When he played himself in To Hell and Back, producers left out some of his real-life heroics, worried that audiences would find the truth unbelievable. Audie's eyes told their own story. There was nothing theatrical about his 1,000-yard stare. Behind the scenes, Murphy's war never really ended. He suffered from nightmares, panic attacks, and the lingering pain of old wounds. He slept with a pistol under his pillow, and sometimes spent nights driving aimlessly just to escape his memories. Despite his inner turmoil, he refused to let Hollywood turn him into a one-note action star. He tackled romantic comedies, westerns, and even wrote poetry. His humility never faded, and neither did the sense of danger that followed him everywhere. Murphy died young, killed in a plane crash at the age of 45. Today, his grave at Arlington National Cemetery is one of the most visited in the country. His story remains a reminder that the toughest men in Hollywood are often the ones you never see coming. Some men are forged by war. Others survive the kind of childhood that most of us can't even imagine. The next actor on our list grew up in coal mines and learned early that life only gave you what you fought for. Wait until you see how Charles Bronson became the face of toughness for an entire generation. 2. Charles Bronson. Before Charles Bronson was a Hollywood legend, he was just a kid from the Pennsylvania coal country. Born Charles Bukinski, he came from a family so large that sometimes he did not know if he would have shoes for school. The Bronsons were poor in ways that most of Hollywood's elite could never imagine. By the time Charles was 10, he was already in the mines, working beside his father and brothers, emerging each day covered in coal dust and old before his time. Life in those mines was unforgiving. Every shift was a battle with darkness, cold, and the quiet threat of disaster. Bronson later said he never felt fear after the mines because nothing in the outside world could ever compare. When the United States entered World War II, Bronson found his way out of the mines and into the Army Air Forces, where he served as a tail gunner on a B-29 bomber. Sitting at the back of a plane while enemy fighters closed in gave him nerves of steel. He was wounded in action and came home with a Purple Heart. But like many men of his generation, he rarely spoke about what he saw. Hollywood was a different kind of battlefield. Bronson's looks were striking, but not in the way of a classic leading man. His face was carved with sharp lines, his eyes forever half-narrowed, as if he was measuring you for trouble. Casting agents were unsure what to do with him at first. He was too intense for romance, too real for most comedies. But when they put a gun or a set of brass knuckles in his hand, the camera never blinked. He had the aura of someone who had seen things, survived things, and would do whatever it took to finish the job. Bronson's breakthrough came slowly. He spent years in small parts, playing heavies, thugs, or quiet men with violent pasts. He did not mind the grind. He was used to hard work and never saw himself as above any role. Eventually, audiences noticed. By the late 60s and 70s, he became the face of tough guy cinema, starring in films like The Dirty Dozen, Death Wish, and Once Upon a Time in the West. Directors loved that Bronson did his own fight scenes, not out of bravado, but because he knew how real violence looked and felt. He moved like a man who had spent years throwing punches and taking them. Bronson worked well into his old age, his features growing even more weathered and imposing. On set, he was respected not just for his physical presence, but for his patience, work ethic, and ability to bring a dangerous authenticity to any scene. The toughness you saw on screen was real, earned in the dark tunnels of the coal mines and forged in the skies over wartime Japan. If Bronson embodied the kind of toughness born from poverty and pain, the next man on our list was shaped by a different trial altogether, one that would leave scars, both seen and unseen, for the rest of his life. Lee Marvin did not just act out violence, he survived it, and it changed everything about the way he walked through the world. 3. Lee Marvin. For most of his career, Lee Marvin seemed almost larger than life. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and possessed a voice like gravel dragged across asphalt. Audiences believed him in every role because he brought a sense of danger that could not be faked. But Marvin's toughness was not just an act or a studio creation. It was the lasting result of scars, physical and emotional, that he carried back from the Pacific Theater in World War II. Before Hollywood, Marvin was a high school dropout who drifted through odd jobs before enlisting in the United States Marine Corps at the age of 18. He was soon shipped off to fight the Japanese on the islands of Saipan and Iwo Jima, scenes of some of the war's bloodiest combat. Marvin was a scout sniper in the 4th Marine Division, tasked with moving ahead of his unit, seeking out enemy positions, and doing the kind of work that left no room for error or nerves. Combat in the Pacific was brutal beyond imagination, and the line between survival and death was razor thin. Marvin was wounded in the Battle of Saipan, shot in the backside and the foot by machine gun fire. The wounds were severe enough to hospitalize him for over a year and ended his combat career. He was awarded the Purple Heart and carried a limp for the rest of his life. Later, when asked about his injuries, Marvin was never romantic about it. He spoke bluntly, saying that anyone who claimed to enjoy combat was either a liar or a fool. The war changed him in ways that never left. Friends and colleagues described him as a man who could be affable one minute and ice-cold the next, as if he was still toggling between survival and peace. When Marvin returned to civilian life, he bounced from job to job before stumbling into acting almost by accident. Hollywood in the 50s and 60s was filled with pretty faces, but Marvin's was different. His features were weathered, his eyes world-weary, and his body language always suggested that he was sizing up the room, just in case. Casting directors saw in him an authenticity that no acting school could teach. When he played a tough cop, a soldier, or a killer, audiences sensed that the violence was not a performance. Marvin knew how to project threat without ever raising his voice. His filmography became a catalog of American masculinity, sometimes heroic, sometimes tragic, always unvarnished. In The Dirty Dozen, he led a squad of misfits with a cold authority that was unmistakably real. In Point Blank, his portrayal of a man bent on revenge was both terrifying and magnetic, never tipping into melodrama. Directors and actors alike respected him, sometimes feared him, but always trusted his instincts. Marvin rarely rehearsed or overthought a scene. He simply drew on his own history, letting decades of experience shape his every movement and line. Despite his hard living and hard drinking, Marvin was not immune to the shadows of his past. He spoke openly about nightmares and bouts of depression, and while he never sought pity, he also never pretended to be invulnerable. That vulnerability added depth to his performances and made his on-screen personas feel even more complex. Lee Marvin's legacy is not just one of brute strength, but of survival, resilience, and the high cost of true toughness. It is one thing to bring the ghosts of war to Hollywood, but the next man on our list lived as a daredevil in nearly every sense. Where Lee Marvin's danger was shaped by survival, Steve McQueen's was built on risk, rebellion, and a need for speed that could never be tamed. What McQueen did off-screen was sometimes even more daring than what he did for the camera, and his story shows just how close the line between action and disaster could really be. 4. Steve McQueen. Steve McQueen was more than an actor. He was a legend in constant motion. His early life was pure chaos, filled with poverty, abandonment, and more fights than anyone should survive. Raised by relatives and shuffled through reform schools, McQueen learned early that you had to fight for every scrap of respect. At 14, he hit the road, hustling his way through odd jobs and sleeping wherever he could. The United States Marine Corps gave him structure, but it could not tame him. He was busted down in rank over and over for fighting, yet, when it mattered, he showed courage, once pulling 5 fellow Marines out of icy water during a training accident. McQueen never bragged about these acts, but those who knew him saw the steel beneath the cool exterior. Hollywood discovered McQueen's restless spirit, but acting alone was not enough. He insisted on doing his own stunts, racing cars and motorcycles professionally under fake names so that insurance companies could not stop him. He was known for taking risks that left crew members holding their breath. During The Great Escape, he performed every motorcycle stunt except for one, the legendary jump, which only an insurance policy kept from his hands. His on-screen intensity mirrored his real life. When police warned him that his name was on Charles Manson's hit list, McQueen responded by carrying a pistol, not by hiding. He was generous to friends but demanded honesty and loyalty. When cancer came, McQueen faced it with the same head-on defiance that had carried him through every other challenge, refusing to go quietly and always seeking another race, another thrill. McQueen was the original daredevil, a man who needed speed and danger to feel alive. But while he was always running, always pushing limits, the next man on our list built his legacy on relentless willpower and an iron determination to overcome every obstacle. Kirk Douglas was not just a survivor. He was a fighter, in every sense of the word. 5. Kirk Douglas. Before Kirk Douglas became a silver screen icon, he was the son of impoverished immigrants in upstate New York. A boy so poor that he sometimes survived on scraps, begged from neighbors, or meals he earned by wrestling with other kids in the street. Born Ishur Danielovich, Douglas carried the burden of his father's failed dreams and the raw urgency of never having enough. It was not ambition alone that drove him, but an unyielding refusal to be beaten by circumstances. That same intensity would one day fill theaters, but in his youth, it was the fuel that kept him going through one hard job after another. Douglas never let poverty defeat him. He worked as a rag man, a waiter, a janitor, and a professional wrestler. Anything to keep his family afloat and buy time for his studies. Wrestling was not just a means to an end. It was a test of will, a way to prove to himself and anyone watching that he was not to be underestimated. When he won a wrestling scholarship to St. Lawrence University, it was as if he had bent fate to his will. Every hard-fought match left its mark. Every victory and bruise prepared him for the next round, both in athletics and in life. World War II changed everything for Douglas. He joined the United States Navy and found himself in the claustrophobic belly of a submarine chaser, where fear was constant and danger was everywhere. The tight quarters, the ever-present threat of enemy attack, the exhaustion of endless shifts. It was an education in endurance that few actors could ever claim. He was injured in service, but instead of coming home broken, he came back harder, focused on building a future nobody could take away. Hollywood took notice. The same raw energy and determination that had carried Douglas through hardship now electrified every frame he appeared in. He approached acting as a contact sport, throwing himself into roles with a physicality and conviction that set him apart. On the set of Spartacus, Douglas was not just the lead actor, but the driving force behind the entire production. He fought for creative control, challenged directors, and demanded excellence from everyone around him. His legendary clashes with director Stanley Kubrick were less about ego than about refusing to compromise his vision. Douglas believed that toughness was not about being the loudest or most aggressive, but about standing firm when others bent. Douglas was infamous for refusing stunt doubles. He trained with real wrestlers and gladiators for Spartacus, insisting on performing dangerous falls and brutal fight scenes himself. During one intense shoot, he suffered a serious injury, but rather than take time off, he simply returned to the set after a brief recovery. He wore his scars like badges, reminders that pain was just part of the process. But it was not just physical toughness that made Douglas extraordinary. He had the mental strength to reinvent himself over and over again. In 1991, he survived a helicopter crash that claimed 2 lives and left him with crippling injuries. Instead of retreating, he faced months of painful rehabilitation, determined to walk again. Then, after a severe stroke in his 80s, Douglas taught himself to speak all over again, eventually writing a book about his recovery. He never let setbacks define him. Each time, he came back. A little more battered, but still standing, still fighting, still living by the code he learned in his toughest years. Douglas's willpower was legendary among his peers. His friend and sometime rival Burt Lancaster once said, "Kirk never quits. He doesn't accept limits. He just crashes through them." It was this spirit, more than any movie role, that made Douglas the embodiment of resilience and true grit. If Kirk Douglas showed Hollywood what relentless determination looked like, the next man on our list packed all of that ferocity into a much smaller frame. James Cagney's toughness was forged in the gritty neighborhoods of New York, and he never let anyone forget it. What he lacked in size, he made up for with pure explosive force and a fighting spirit that could not be contained. 6. James Cagney. James Cagney was not built like your typical tough guy, but every inch of him radiated danger and energy. Raised in the hard neighborhoods of Manhattan's Lower East Side, Cagney learned to fight before he ever set foot on a stage. Street brawls, gang run-ins, and the daily grind of tenement life shaped him into someone you simply did not mess with. Size meant nothing when you were quick, clever, and refused to back down. Cagney's survival skills turned into real fighting talent. He boxed to defend himself, but he also learned the discipline of movement as a vaudeville dancer. This combination gave him a style all his own, fast, unpredictable, and explosive, whether he was on stage or in a fight. When he hit Hollywood, he brought those same instincts with him. His fight scenes looked so real because, to him, they were. Directors sometimes had to remind him to pull his punches, but even then, actors who worked with him knew Cagney was always ready for a real scrap if someone crossed the line. His toughness went beyond physical brawling. Cagney took on the studio bosses with the same relentless spirit, demanding better contracts and more respect for actors. He refused to play the studio game, becoming one of the first to challenge Hollywood's powerful executives and win. Stories spread about his quick temper, but those who knew him best also saw his loyalty and kindness. He quietly helped friends, supported colleagues in trouble, and expected everyone around him to show the same grit and integrity that defined his own life. Even after he left the spotlight for a quieter life, neighbors still saw flashes of the man who once owned every scene he entered. Cagney's message was simple: stand your ground, fight for what matters, and never let the world push you around. He was proof that toughness was about heart and spirit, not size. Yet, while Cagney fought like a hurricane, the next man on our list commanded every room with sheer presence alone. John Wayne was not just a movie cowboy. He lived with the grit and endurance of a true frontier legend. If you thought toughness was about being quick on your feet, just wait until you see what real stubborn strength looks like. 7. John Wayne, the frontier giant. John Wayne was not just a Hollywood cowboy. He was the living, breathing definition of American grit. Towering at 6'4", with a presence that seemed carved out of rock, Wayne's life was steeped in hard work from the very start. Born Marion Morrison, he learned early that success came only to those who put in the sweat, whether hauling coal in Iowa or herding livestock under the California sun. That toughness, shaped by real-world struggles, made him the authentic cowboy long before Hollywood ever called. His athletic build earned him a football scholarship to USC, but a shoulder injury rerouted him from the field to the studio lot. Early Hollywood was no place for the weak. Wayne did his time as a prop man and animal wrangler, moving heavy gear and picking up skills most actors only faked. Stunt work was never off-limits for him. Whether riding wild horses, leaping off cliffs, or brawling through saloon fights, he handled every bit of it himself, earning scars that never made it into the script. Wayne's iron will and work ethic were legendary. He showed up first, worked the longest, and shrugged off pain like it was nothing. During the Alamo, he cracked ribs in a horse fall, but just taped himself up and pressed on. Even after losing a lung to cancer, he was back in the saddle within the year, still doing his own stunts. Leadership came naturally. Cast and crew followed his lead, inspired by his sheer resilience. His greatest rival, Kirk Douglas, once admitted that you could not out-tough Wayne no matter how hard you tried. But Wayne's strength was not all brawn. He weathered every setback, every illness, with the same quiet defiance that made his screen heroes unforgettable. For Wayne, toughness was not just about enduring pain or taking risks. It was about refusing to back down, no matter the odds. Still, the next spot on our list belongs to a man who proved you did not need size to be formidable. Robert Mitchum's version of toughness came from a lifetime of surviving on the fringes, where being cool under pressure was just as important as knowing how to throw a punch. Mitchum's brand of danger was subtle, but it was just as real. 8. Robert Mitchum. Robert Mitchum never had to pretend to be tough. He was the real thing, long before cameras rolled. Orphaned young, he spent his teenage years as a hobo, riding trains during the Great Depression, getting into fistfights, and taking any job that would keep him fed. He boxed for cash, his nose broken more than once, and even landed on a Georgia chain gang for vagrancy. That experience left him with a disdain for authority and a toughness that stuck with him his entire life. When Mitchum finally made it to Hollywood, his gritty background came through in every role. He moved with relaxed confidence and spoke with the kind of deadpan calm that only someone who's seen real hardship can muster. Mitchum's cool was never an act. He had lived through things most men only saw in movies. On set, he was known for his surprising strength, for taking punches in fight scenes and shrugging off injuries. When he did time for marijuana possession, his image only grew more legendary. Audiences believed him because his toughness wasn't Hollywood fantasy, it was survival. That authenticity set Mitchum apart. He did not need theatrics or bravado. His world-weary eyes told the story. If you were looking for a Hollywood star who truly understood what it meant to be hard as nails, Mitchum was your man. Now, if Mitchum's cool was born out of hard years and hard knocks, Anthony Quinn's strength was forged through a lifetime of physical labor and real-world struggle, a force you could feel in every scene he played. 9. Anthony Quinn. Anthony Quinn's powerful screen presence was no accident. Born during the chaos of the Mexican Revolution and raised in Los Angeles' poorest neighborhoods, Quinn started working before he was 10. He built his physique by hauling meat in butcher shops and doing grueling construction jobs, not gym workouts. Boxing was never a Hollywood side gig for him. It was about survival and putting food on the table. Those broken noses and rough edges you saw on film were earned the hard way. Unlike many stars who just played tough, Quinn's strength was obvious to everyone on set. He did his own heavy lifting, carried logs on camera without flinching, and insisted on performing risky stunts well into his 50s and 60s. There was no ego about it either. Quinn didn't care for macho posturing. He was as comfortable discussing art and poetry as he was leading a fight scene. Directors and co-stars admired his authenticity. When you watched him wrestle or brawl on screen, you were seeing a man who had lived a hard life and survived real hardship. Quinn brought a rare combination of raw strength and emotional depth, making every performance unforgettable. But for all his brute power, Quinn was never afraid to show vulnerability. That balance of toughness and sensitivity gave him a unique magnetism, both on set and off. His story reminds us that sometimes the toughest men are the ones who know how to carry a heavy load and still walk with a gentle heart. From Quinn's natural force we move to a very different type of Hollywood giant, one who took on epic roles, performed his own dangerous stunts, and became a symbol of physical and moral courage. Charlton Heston brought a heroic energy to every project, setting a standard few could match. 10. Charlton Heston. Charlton Heston was not just an epic actor, he was a living symbol of old-school heroism. Before fame, he served as an aerial gunner during World War II, facing the real dangers of combat long before he ever wielded a sword or chariot whip for the cameras. Heston brought that same courage and stubborn endurance to Hollywood, where he became famous for doing his own stunts, even when producers begged him not to. For the 10 Commandments, Heston worked under the brutal Egyptian sun, never once complaining as others fell out from heat exhaustion. In Ben-Hur, he learned to drive a real chariot for months and insisted on performing the majority of the race himself, even after a near-fatal mishap. Physical pain never seemed to slow him down. Heston believed suffering for the role made the final result more real, and he wore his bruises like badges of honor. But what made Heston stand out was not just strength. He combined his physical prowess with a sense of integrity that shone through every role. Whether playing Moses, Michelangelo, or a dystopian hero, Heston's moral conviction was unmistakable. He was never afraid to stand up for what he believed in, both on set and in public life. Co-stars and directors often remarked that Heston was the rare actor who did not just play heroes, he lived like one. Watching him command the screen, it was easy to believe that Heston could overcome any obstacle. He set a high bar for courage and commitment in Hollywood, leaving a legacy that stretched far beyond his films. That's our journey through the 10 toughest actors in Hollywood history. Men who brought real grit, pain, and spirit to the silver screen because they lived it long before the director called action. Each one proved that toughness is not about size or swagger, but about facing hardship and never backing down. Who impressed you the most? Do you have a favorite classic tough guy story, or think someone else deserves a spot on this list? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let's keep this conversation going. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss another look at the real legends behind the movies. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the wildest Hollywood stories are the ones that actually happened.